You know it ain't all about replicants, Terminators, and galaxies far, far away. Although blockbuster sci-fi is big business, no doubt. Star Wars, Avatar, Terminator, even the MCU, for example. It's not all major blockbusters or such critically praised genre entries as 2001: A Space Odyssey, Blade Runner 2049, or Arrival. There are plenty more great science fiction films that don't necessarily get held up in such high regard. With that in mind, I'm Will for What Culture, back from a season of moisture farming on Tatooine to bring you 10 underrated science fiction movies you must see. Number 10, Pi. Years before he briefly revived Mickey Rourke's career with The Wrestler, steered Natalie Portman to Oscar glory with Black Swan, and freaked out just about everyone who saw Mother, US filmmaker Darren Aronofsky made his debut with this very unusual, ultra-low budget 1998 indie. Pi's status as a science fiction might be disputed by some, but then it's hard to narrow it down to any specific genre. It might be classified as a psychological thriller, but there are clear horror overtones and even hints of fantasy. All in all though, Pi deals with the potential of the human brain, the untapped regions within yet to be accessed, and the bizarre possibilities of such an endeavour. This surely qualifies as science fiction. The film revolves around Max, a genius mathematician working on a theory that numbers can explain everything in nature. Attempting to make stock market predictions via the mathematical constant pi, Max's computer churns out a seemingly random number which turns out to have very significant ramifications. Max soon finds himself being followed by mysterious strangers with all manner of sinister forces amassing around him in order to capitalize on his discovery. Or is it all just a paranoid delusion? It sounds confusing as hell, and yeah, alright, it is, but you don't need to understand the mathematics to be captivated by the incredibly tense, oppressive, mind-bending atmosphere the film generates. Number 9, Altered States. Director Ken Russell's 1980 Altered States is another mind-bending entry that explores humanity and absurdity through the sci-fi lens. William Hurt, in what was his first film role, remarkably takes the lead as Dr. Edward Jessup, a psychologist who becomes fascinated with exploring different states of consciousness, theorizing that these can unlock the origins of human intelligence. Through a combination of sensory deprivation techniques and a rare plant with hallucinogenic qualities, Ed starts experiencing these altered states for himself, but in so doing begins to radically rewrite his own genetic structure. As is the norm in a Ken Russell film, it's all trippy as hell and outrageously over the top, so it can be a little difficult to take seriously, especially after you've seen the South Park scene that spoofs the film. But aside from that parody scene sort of robbing the film of a little bit of its serious factor, Altered States delves deep into some fascinating subject matter, both as a speculation on the nature of consciousness and life itself, as well as a compelling drama about the destructive potential of obsession. Number 8, Colossal. It's curious that a movie starring one of the best known actresses currently working in film could be so widely ignored, yet 2017's Colossal suffered just that fate. In and out of cinemas with very little aplomb, reportedly taking barely $3 million at the box office despite the presence of typically bankable Oscar winner Anne Hathaway. Still, there's no denying that the film was always likely to be too weird for mainstream tastes. Hathaway stars as Gloria, a recently unemployed alcoholic forced to move back from New York to her sleepy hometown. Bizarrely, her move coincides with the sudden arrival of a giant monster in Seoul. Naturally, this news grabs everyone's attention, but no one is more alarmed than Gloria, who comes to the shocking realization that she is in some way inadvertently controlling the monster and its movements. Colossal is a very strange blend of grounded lo-fi indie drama and giant monster movie. Ultimately, the human elements take precedence, and the fairly low budget means that the special effects aren't quite so great as we'd like. Even so, in common with all the best science fiction, Colossal establishes clear rules behind the bizarre phenomena and explores them to interesting and dramatic effect. Number 7, The GUYVER. One of the really great things about science fiction is its range, how it can encompass high drama, lofty films, and sophisticated ideas, or at the other end of the spectrum, lowbrow, theatrical, Saturday morning cartoonish fun. 1991's The Guyver belongs in the latter category. A live-action adaptation of the manga Bio Booster Armor Guyver, it stars Jack Armstrong as a young, fairly dim martial arts student who is unwittingly fused with a piece of extraterrestrial technology that turns him into the Guyver, a deadly living weapon. Originally released in Europe as Mutronics, The Guyver is notorious for featuring Star Wars legend Mark Hamill in a supporting role, and as a result of being mismarketed to suggest he was the lead. Ultimately, there's only one real star here, and that's the spectacularly weird practical effects work. There's no denying that The Guyver is an extremely camp, corny, juvenile affair, often coming off like an unusually violent and gory episode of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, something which has long since displeased fans of the darker, less comedic source material. However, it's just fun. It's just fun. Fun movies are good. Life is good. Damn it, enjoy yourself. Plus, there's something very rewarding about a film that includes so many bizarre body morphing effects almost entirely via practical means, with no CGI. Number 6. Hardware. Writer-director Richard Stanley's 1990 feature debut can easily be classed as much as a horror movie as science fiction. It's also looked down in some quarters due to some controversy over its origins. Though Stanley initially passed the story off as his own, legal action by the publishers of 2000 AD forced him to concede that he lifted a lot of it from Shock, a story which 2000 AD Comics ran a decade before. Still, it's hard to deny that Stanley's film does a tremendous job presenting a nightmarish yet eerily plausible future on a limited budget. Hardware looked set to launch the director as a major player in genre filmmaking in the 1990s, until The Island of Dr. Moreau stopped that dead. Which is a good book, by the way. If you like sci-fi, you gotta check out all of H.G. Wells' books, seriously. Back to the movie though, while its primary focus is on a killer droid unwittingly set loose in an apartment building, the real power and horror of Hardware is in its world building, an irradiated, overpopulated dystopia where the prevalence of technology seems to have finally robbed the world of all its humanity. While its late 1980s cyberpunk aesthetics might seem a little dated, Hardware is still an enthralling, thought-provoking, and often genuinely unsettling work. Number 5. Robot Jocks. Produced by legendary schlockmeister Charles Band and directed by Reanimator's Stuart Gordon, this 1990 sci-fi romp may seem like a blatant RoboCop cash-in from the title alone, but it's proved to be an influential cult favourite in its own right. In a post-apocalyptic future, the resolution of World War III saw all warfare declared illegal worldwide. Instead, world powers now settle their disputes via one-on-one combat in giant robots, and the quote-unquote jocks, the people who pilot these mighty mech suits, become superstars, none more so than Achilles. Given that this was a 1990 production, it's little surprise that the market and its principal opponent, the Confederation, are barely concealed stand-ins for the USA and the USSR, and in common with Gordon's horror movies, there's a sharp thread of underlying social commentary which may come as a surprise, given how lowbrow the material seems. Still, you can just as easily disregard the political overtones and simply revel in the rock'em sock'em robot fighting action. Robot Jocks has a tremendous old school charm thanks to its chunky, anime-inspired mech suit designs, mostly brought to life via good old-fashioned stop-motion animation. And if the premise alone didn't make it obvious, there's no denying it had a major influence on Pacific Rim. Number 4. Strange Days. Set in an imagined 1999, Strange Days takes place in a world where new, illegal technology enables users to directly relive memories recorded by others. Rafe Fiennes, very much cast against type this time, stars as Lenny, an ex-cop who now works as a black market dealer of these chips. But in the midst of serious civil unrest in LA, Lenny comes into possession of a clip that shows the murder of a prostitute, setting in motion a very dramatic, potentially world-changing chain of events. By setting itself only a few years ahead of when it was made, there's very little mistaking that Strange Days is directly commenting on the socio-political climate of the time, particularly in wake of the LA riots. Beyond this, it's a compelling and furiously inventive blend of science fiction and mystery thriller, and on top of its political overtones, it also delves into some thought-provoking psychosexual territory, which is, always interesting. Number 3. These Final Hours. Science fiction typically takes its ideas from theories and speculations about our world's future, and one thing that all scientists seem to agree on is that eventually this world will cease to exist altogether. What happens if we're still here when that happens? This is the central premise of 2013's These Final Hours, an Australian film from director Zach Hilditch. An asteroid has landed in the Atlantic, sending a gargantuan wave of fire across the northern hemisphere, which has wiped out all life and will shortly make its way down under. In the final day before it hits, young party animal James heads out to a massive end-of-the-world orgy in the hopes of blocking out all feeling before death comes for them all. However, along the way he crosses paths with a lost girl in search of her family and is forced to reassess his handling of the situation. Showing a world in which social order has broken down completely, These Final Hours doesn't paint an especially rosy portrait of human nature, as everyday people turn semi-feral, giving in to their basest urges. Even so, it's hard to deny that such scenes would ensue under these circumstances. As should be readily apparent, These Final Hours certainly isn't a barrel of laughs, and it doesn't make for particularly easy viewing, but it is a very thought-provoking, sobering contemplation on morality. It also seems entirely plausible that Rogue One, a Star Wars story, took some influence from its fiery finale. Number 2. ZARDOZ. There are some people that declare this 1974 science fiction epic to be one of the worst movies ever made. For many, it's known only for featuring Sean Connery wearing a long, dark ponytail and bright orange proto-Borat mankini, which seems to confirm it as a high-camp classic. There's no denying that ZARDOZ is the kind of excessive, bizarre, over-ambitious filmmaking that could only happen on such a large scale in the 1970s. However, it is also an undeniably thoughtful, imaginative speculation on what might become of human society should science crack the problem of immortality. Connery is Zed, a savage of the wastelands whose Denzians are taught to kill one another en masse and equipped with the guns to do so by their god, ZARDOZ, a giant floating stone head who visits their land intermittently. However, a curiously stricken Zed sneaks into the mouth of ZARDOZ in hopes of visiting the land of the gods. Have you guys seen Rick and Morty? That scene on Gazorpazorp? Yeah, it's from this. Once there, Zed discovers the alarming truth that his people have been manipulated by a decadent overclass who live an indulgent lifestyle, having been freed from the burden of death. However, eternity has left them jaded, and the presence of this proletariat brute sends a shockwave through their social order. So yeah, ZARDOZ is bursting with post-flower power weirdness and self-indulgence, has too many ideas for its own good, and was never going to be to all tastes. Even so, it's clearly a pretty unique experience and a very rewarding one, so long as you can get on its weird wavelength. Number 1. ZATHURA, a space adventure. Maybe above all the other films and genres we've discussed so far on this list, science fiction has been utilized to its greatest effect in cinematic history in family films, from Star Wars to The Iron Giant to WALL-E to E.T. and beyond. However, Jon Favreau's 2005 ZATHURA, a space adventure is too often overlooked. This was the movie Favreau made immediately before Iron Man, and it was here that he really honed his use of effects, brilliantly combining classic practical work with judicious use of CGI, incorporating robots, aliens, and all manner of interstellar phenomena. It feels as big as any sci-fi spectacular, despite the action being confined entirely to a single house. The plot revolves around a board game that alters reality around its players, like it's basically the same as Jumanji, but with space stuff, not jungle stuff. But despite that similarity, there's a pleasant timelessness to ZATHURA that makes it family-friendly, great viewing at any time, and as good a film as any to introduce younger viewers to the wonders of science fiction. And there you have it, folks, 10 underrated science fiction movies you must see. Don't forget to drop a comment down below with your own favourite underrated masterpiece, and leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Also, feel free to subscribe and visit whatculture.com for daily news, lists, and articles. I'm Will for What Culture, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.